Welcome to the OpenSciEd Distance Learning Support webinar. The PDF of this presentation slideshow is available on the Louisiana Believes website and includes active links to the resources inside. It might be a good idea to pause this webinar and open the slideshow presentation PDF to follow along as you view. This webinar is designed to familiarize teachers and school leaders with the department's distance learning guidance for the prototype unit, 7th grade weather, listed as Unit 2 in the 7th grade Louisiana Guide to Implementing OpenSciEd. The department has plans to release support for distance learning for all grades 6 through 8 OpenSciEd units listed in the Louisiana implementation guides, including field test units. We'll start out with an overview of the purpose and design considerations for these resources. Before we dive in, a note that the target audience for this webinar are teachers and school leaders who have already engaged in typical OpenSciEd training. This webinar does not replace that training, and as such, if you have not received OpenSciEd training, you should not proceed with this webinar. This guidance was designed to support continuous learning for middle school students in science in a distance learning or hybrid school environment. The first unit is available now, linked within the PDF of this presentation, published on the Science Planning page on the Louisiana Believes website. Guidance for this unit, as well as upcoming guidance for additional units, will contain links to essential OpenSciEd unit resources, both overall unit and lesson-by-lesson guidance, and printable materials for each lesson. Let's take a look at the design considerations for this guidance. No lessons were omitted. Adaptations are strictly pedagogical and alter the OpenSciEd curriculum only to the extent required by a distance learning environment. This guidance has been designed for a 100% virtual learning environment. Will need to be adapted for other models, such as hybrid models, where learning takes place both in person and remotely. In order for this high-quality science curriculum to be most effective, students need to engage in a live environment with teachers and their fellow students. And every effort should be made by school systems to ensure access to a device and internet in the event of distance learning. Each unit design is based on a 3 virtual class per week ideal model. In the event of a hybrid learning environment, the components that take place during virtual classes should be prioritized for in-person learning. This guidance was designed to be broadly applied with any digital platform so that teachers may use what is available and most familiar to them. Teachers should also be using typical OpenSciEd curriculum resources in combination with this digital learning guidance. We'll now take a closer look at the guidance document for the prototype unit. This would be a good time to pause this webinar and skim through the prototype unit on your own. This unit is linked within the PDF of this slideshow. Let's move into the guidance overview. In this section, links to the OpenSciEd resources for the unit, as well as remote learning resources aimed at specific OpenSciEd routines, appear in the introduction. This will allow teachers to make adjustments based on their individual school learning environment and the needs of their students. We're going to start by talking about some language that's used in these OpenSciEd remote learning resources and will be used throughout this webinar. The OpenSciEd resources offer suggestions for adapting each routine to a remote learning model. Notice that the columns have adaptations for synchronous, asynchronous, and learning without technology. Synchronous and asynchronous will be used to describe the activities students will engage in. Activities that take place in a live environment, such as virtual class on a digital conferencing platform, are described as synchronous, while those that take place over time and require students to work independently are described as asynchronous. Following the guidance overview is a table containing norming language for this guidance document. This introduces teachers to the ways in which OpenSciEd will be adapted to a remote learning environment, including specific ideas for addressing equitability for students without internet. Some of the work in each unit is designed to be done asynchronously before or after virtual classes, and some will be addressed in synchronous class meetings. Decisions about the learning models for school are still being made, and many districts are considering a blended model this year, where students will learn in person on some days and virtually on others. In this case, teachers should prioritize any activities listed in virtual class meetings for in-person learning. Let's take a deeper look into these three different norming language terms. Since the basic model for these lessons are pre-work, virtual class, and post-work, here are some examples of tasks that students will be asked to engage in, or students might be asked to engage in during pre-work, virtual class, and post-work. It's important to mention here that post-work activities for the previous virtual class often overlap with pre-work for the next virtual class, so that many of the tasks in each are similar. However, all of these tasks are alike in that they can be done by students independently. In contrast, places in the lesson where discourse is necessary for sense-making have been prioritized for virtual class meetings. Following these terms in the norming language are a couple of resources designed to keep students on track when progressing through each lesson. Thinking Deeper documents were designed using OpenSciEd lesson guidance and serve as a digital science notebook to hold students individually accountable for thinking during all lesson activities. They follow along with and are to be used in conjunction with adapted lesson slideshows. These Thinking Deeper documents can be used within science notebooks or as a replacement for science notebooks when those are not available for students. The slideshows mentioned here are original lesson slideshows from the unit that have been modified for remote learning. At this time, you may want to pause the webinar and take a look at the Lesson 1 Thinking Deeper document linked here. In addition to the previously mentioned activities, discussion boards and home investigations may also appear in the unit guidance. These are designed to provide additional opportunities to engage students with science practices and in discourse with one another, so teachers will not have to schedule virtual class meetings every day. Discussion boards are used to engage students in asynchronous discourse, and home investigations allow students an opportunity for independent, hands-on learning. In a blended learning model, these activities where students are engaging in discussion or in hands-on science should be prioritized for in-person meetings, much the same way that activities designated in virtual classes would be. A lesson overview is provided for each lesson in the unit. It contains information about materials all students will need in order to engage in learning. Additional printed materials or files that students without internet will need, and a list of days when virtual class meetings will occur. In the guidance document, links to all of these resources are embedded for teacher planning purposes. Following the lesson overview for each lesson is a table containing lesson guidance for each day of the lesson. This guidance is aligned to the lesson components and the learning plan snapshot from the OpenSciEd Teacher Edition for the unit. Contain links to documents and additional resources teachers and students will need, as well as a brief description of student and teacher actions in a distance learning setting. Notice in column 1, a list of slides that correspond to each lesson part appears. Under teacher or student actions, you will also see the norming language that identifies the type of activity that will occur. This label would also appear on the slideshow on the slides that correspond to these parts of the lesson. Notice that the cells in the last 2 columns for teacher and student are merged. This identifies when teachers and students are engaging in a synchronous environment through a virtual class. Let's take a closer look at the lesson resources, starting with the lesson slideshows. As mentioned previously, original lesson slideshows from OpenSciEd have been altered to support distance learning. This shows a couple of key ways in which slides may have been changed. Notice in the top left corner, labels from the norming language are included on each slide. Additionally, more specific directions or directions related specifically to distance learning may be given. These slideshows are intended to be shared electronically, but they can also be saved to a flash drive or printed for students who do not have internet access. Now we'll take a closer look at Thinking Deeper documents. These documents essentially take the information from the teacher guide, such as suggested discussion questions, and additional documents, and house them all in one place. They can be used within science notebooks or as a replacement in the event that students do not have access to their notebooks at home. They will be used by students during all lesson activities, including virtual classes. These documents can be shared electronically, but can also be printed out for students. These documents can be turned in at different points throughout the lesson to allow for individual feedback. This is an example of how the teacher guidance for a lesson is used to design a Thinking Deeper document. This snapshot was taken directly from the OpenSciEd teacher guidance for this unit. Here, students are asked to track air movement and cloud formation. They are annotating hail cloud images taken at different moments during a video of the cloud forming. In class, students would be viewing the video together and using a separate document to make their annotations. This is the Thinking Deeper document for this lesson. Notice that it contains the information provided in the additional document called Tracking Air Movement and Cloud Formation. This is only part of the Thinking Deeper document. The heading lists the name of the document and also the associated slide from the lesson slideshow, and contains details for annotating the cloud images as well as all of the images. The slide listed here would contain the video that students would need to watch in order to complete this activity. Now that we've looked at the lesson resources associated with each lesson, let's take a look at a broader view. In addition to detailed lesson guidance, this document also contains a lesson set overview. This is found at the beginning of the document and is linked to a bookmark for the first lesson of the set. It houses all of the information contained in the lesson guidance for each lesson in this set. Notice that there are links to all of the resources needed for every lesson in the lesson set, including lesson slideshows, Thinking Deeper documents, and any additional documents. As we move down further into the lesson set overview, you'll notice that it also includes a list of when students should ideally join virtual class accompanied by the lesson in which the class will occur. Additionally, it has a list of assessment opportunities. This will allow long-term planning for teachers so that they may give students advance notice of virtual class meetings as well as assessments. Now that we've looked at the lesson resources available for each unit and the guidance document, we'll move on to the release schedule for the other OpenSciEd units. The preliminary timeline shown here is based on having materials ready for teachers just in time during the 2020-2021 school year. At this time, there is no plan to release guidance on Louisiana Scope and Sequence units. Notice that the first lesson sets for the first OpenSciEd unit in each grade level will be available before the start of school. If you have any questions or feedback related to the distance learning resources outlined in this webinar, please reach out by email to stem@la.gov. Thank you for your time.